Welcome to our Uspire webinar, Leading a Growth-Orientated Team. My name is Peter Lynagh. I am the Uspire London Peer Group Chair, and I'm joined today by Mark Fritz, who is the leadership expert. But before I introduce Mark, would you all kindly go into chat and introduce yourselves, name and company, and also to use the chat for any questions that you may like to ask during the session. And bear in mind, we will endeavour to answer all those questions, but if we don't, we will definitely reply to you after today. So, on that basis, Mark, thank you very much for joining us today, and it's an
Pleasure to be
absolute
here.
pleasure. And it's a pleasure to be working with you again after all this time. So to begin with, could I just ask you to introduce yourself and share your background and how you started in the business?
Well, as you can hear from my accent, I'm an American, but I'm married to a Japanese and I live in London. I spent 25 years in the corporate world, lived in about 7 countries around the world, uh, led a lot of change, particularly early in my career in terms of enterprise change. And then spent the last 20 years basically, delivering leadership training, mentoring. I taught at various business schools across Europe, primarily now with IE Business School in Madrid. And now I spend most of my time in the Middle East. I think beginning of December will be my ninth trip to the Middle East and doing sessions there. So that's me. And basically, for 45 years, I've basically worked with someone from a different country every single day.
Wow. So we're honored for you to be working with us today there,
It's a
although
pleasure. Yeah, it's good.
we've got a number of different countries online today as well, so it's not just the UK.
Good,
Okay,
good.
so let me just dive in with a few questions, if I may, Mark. Is
Sure.
that how do leaders build confidence and accountability across their teams from your perspective?
Well, I really focused on really delegating outcomes to my people and giving them that sense of pride in feeling it's theirs. And so I was always, delegating something that they could take ownership of. I was always focusing on, boosting their confidence in terms of taking action and really, using more of their potential towards that and really just trying to use their potential because I work for so many micromanagers and you never get to use your potential if you work for a micromanager. They're telling you what to do. So I had to do that type of leadership anyway because majority of my career I was leading people who were not in front of me. They were located in other countries, and you can't manage activities, you can only manage progress and achievement. And in fact, you can't tell people what to do exactly in other countries because business gets done differently and so forth. So I found that I really needed to empower the people. I still have to hold them accountable to deliver
Mm.
what they need to deliver. And I still responsible for the overall team delivering. But I really wanted to give them some element of freedom. And because when I was leading and working in the corporate world, I only wanted two things from a boss. I wanted freedom and visibility. Everything else I could manage. So I basically tried to do that for my people.
Okay, so taking that on a step further, then, Mark, is what is your insight on identifying and developing tomorrow's leaders?
Yeah, the key thing now is that they're going to be managing so many generations, and leading so many generations in the team and so forth. I think tomorrow's leaders, they're going to have to be much better at two particular skills, critical thinking and systemic thinking, because their job is more of a context provider, right? If you think about what you type into AI is that's context. What you get back is content. The ability to do stuff and get things done will be so much easier enabled by AI and utilizing our people's brains in different ways. And so the leaders of tomorrow, they're going to have to be really good context providers, sort of, laying the path ahead so that people can drive faster. And I think that's going to be a real key. And I think personally, I think the micromanagers are going to be too slow for this type of environment because the how is going to be easier to do without someone telling you. And also, it's more important to give a very clear where and a why. I remember many years ago, I heard the guru say this, and I thought it was very insightful. He said, the people who only know how will always be led by the people who know why. And I think the leader's power is going to be more where and why in the future.
Okay, then. So again, how do leaders create a team that leads itself with confidence and clarity?
Well, I mean, for sure, we have to set that the direction, the context well, but we have to also have to set our expectations. The old saying too is, you cannot hit a target you do not have. Your people can't hit a target that you don't clearly provide to them. And I think in today's world too, everything is running so quickly that we don't invest the time up front to make sure that we set clear expectations and we establish them from what we think good looks like. And I think with clear expectations, everybody has a common target. And so, they tend to collaborate more together and work more together as well. And I think also, I think you can't sort of make a process for collaboration. I think the more we create the environment where people make the informal links and so forth, the stronger collaboration you get, the more they share more information. They don't hold information as power, and you get a much more high performing team. And I think also with collaboration you get disagreements, right? If your meetings and your team things are always happy, something is wrong. Either you hired everybody who think exactly the same, or people don't trust each other to say what they're thinking. So I think the very good leaders create an environment where people can do a lot more on their own, but also they can collaborate with each other in ways that they can disagree on approaches and challenge each other, because by doing that you always get stronger solutions.
Okay, well, Chester's come up with quite an interesting question for you, is that how do you nurture collaboration in a hire and fire culture?
Well, in that way, I think the leader set the wrong role model for the team in terms of establishing it. But it's what I found is you're never going to have a perfect environment. You're always working towards that. I think the key things are as much as you can is encourage people and really create work in ways where they have to work together. I used to create something I called interdependence, where I create work in such a way that they need each other for their own personal success. So even in very difficult environments, if people need each other for their own success, they'll find a way to work with each other, even if they don't like each other. And so what I think is in many ways, a leader is the facilitator of the environment. And maybe not the best word, but the leader is creating the conditions by which their people can create the success on their own. And I think the more important part of rather than teamwork is that leaders, we have to create an environment where our people can do a lot more without us, because if they're needing us, we need to be there at the right time or we're slowing them down. And I think that's what I would do.
Okay. So again, culture, as Chester states, is very, very important. So how does a leader build a culture of accountability and ownership?
Yeah, let me go right up front what I think culture is. I define culture as shared expectations, right? We're sharing the same expectations. We're trying to achieve the same thing, right? And we have certain behaviors that we expect from each other. And I think what I found in building a culture, and the fastest way to build a culture is to work with my role models first. If I'm a good role model for key people on my team and they're role modeling the right behaviors, the culture is going to multiply very, very quickly. And let me tell you a funny story. I lived in Japan for 5 years, but I only was there for 2 weeks when this happened. A young lady was pushing a cart each day selling teas, coffees, and snacks. And one day she brought a young daughter with her. And at that time, I didn't know any of the language. She didn't know daughter in English. I didn't know daughter in Japanese. So she said, "This is my copy." This is my copy. I mean, your people copy you. Your best people, the other people are copying your best people. I found that the best way to drive a culture is to get your role models providing those behaviors, examples of the right behavior and so forth. But also, I think you have to discuss the values in a way. And see, values by itself is a non-word. Like a lot of times, organizations have trust as a value. You can't see trust. You can only see the behaviors that demonstrate trust. Or they have a value of innovation. You can't see innovation. You can only see the behaviors that demonstrate innovation. So one of the things that I used to do when I took over a new organization is I used to discuss with the team, and I let the team come up with it. I said, come up with 3 to 5 key behaviors based on the values we have that you would like to expect that from each person in the team back, and so forth. And then if they come up with the behaviors, they're mostly going to police themselves. I don't have to police them. They'll police themselves about that. And one team we asked to do that one time, they came up with 5 key behaviors they would do themselves, but they went one step further. They came up with 5 behaviors they wanted to see from all the leadership team. And I thought that was really good. They kind of like managed up. And we adopted those behaviors that they mentioned, and it created a lot more teamwork, not just across, but up to the leader.
Okay. It can also be very lonely and isolating for a leader today. So being part of a peer group of like-minded leaders is essential. What is your opinion on that, Mark?
Ah, absolutely. You ask anybody and you look at anybody's autobiographies and so forth. Leadership is lonely, and when you're part of a peer group, you're constantly they're helping you to keep perspective. But even more so, what you're doing is you're getting to leverage very, very good life experiences from others in order to lead yourself. Because if you think about it, and I ask this question often in companies, they say, can you grow fast enough based on company provided training? And everybody says no, right? Which means that it's our personal development that really drives our improvements. And what things a great thing about a peer group and a networking group is that they get the best of both worlds. They get a speaker like me to come in and share some ideas from things, leveraging my experiences and what I've learned from other leaders. And they're gaining experiences and leveraging experiences between themselves. And with a networking group that is going on for a while, they build up such a trust that they can get to issues that they wouldn't get with anybody else and so forth. And they probably wouldn't share with their partner at home and so forth. So I think, the key thing I found is how do we leverage the life experiences of others in order to move forward faster? And that's key also, because think about this: your business judgment, your decision making is not just based on your experiences, it's based on the experiences and what you've learned from others, either from the books you read, the people you meet, your networking, etc. And so we really need to keep that type of thing going all the time, because it helps us to be better decision makers and faster decision makers too.
Okay, thank you for that. So at this juncture, could I just ask for those people that joined us a little later, could you just introduce yourselves using chat? And as I mentioned earlier on, please do raise some questions for Mark as we go through the session. And as I said, we will endeavour to cover those, but if we don't, we will get back to you after the session. Okay. Okay, here's an interesting comment from Peter Fazell. When people say my company doesn't invest in me, it's worth asking, what do you do to invest in yourself?
Yeah.
Quite often they don't do anything.
Yeah, it's a good point, but but it's our job also in terms of leadership is to try and maybe trigger or inspire that personal development. You know, years ago, I mean, I left the corporate world in 2004, but years ago, I was able to send a 3 or 5 minute clip, a video clip of something, maybe a book summary or something, and I try to encourage people to want to know more. And so they get an insight, they want to go more. Today people 3 to 5 minutes is a lifetime, right? If it's not less than 30 seconds, they're not considering watching it. But I think we can do some things by triggering it. Oftentimes when someone takes training, it's very good to kind of make it a requirement that that person gives a 20-minute update on what they learned from that training to the rest of the team. So suddenly everybody's learning, and it puts a commitment on them, because there's the old saying, when one teaches, two learn. If they have to share this on, they're going to know their stuff better too. And also, they get really good opportunities for presenting. And most of the people need those opportunities to get better speakers or get better at conveying their ideas to others.
Okay. Okay, another question for you then.
Yeah.
What advice would you give to leaders to enhance them to grow their people to drive growth?
Well, I think you always need to drive. You need to have the right mindsets. A lot of times people talk about growth mindset, and it's described in all different ways. But I've worked with 3 or 4 companies recently, and their number one criteria for what they're trying to hire in for is a growth mindset. And I always call this is I have an axis. I have a chart where it has complexity on the bottom and uncertainty on the left axis. And our world is very, very complex and very, very uncertain. And what's really key in today's world, there's no more perfect answers. It's so complex, there's only options. And so I think what I found is I want to encourage my people to think in options. And I'll give you a tip. Is a great way to really drive forward with people and not tell them what to do is ask people for options. If they have a problem thing, force them to bring options to you. With options, you can coach them towards what could be a better approach forward, given your knowledge and so forth. If you only ask people for one thing, and you don't like it, you have to tell yours anyway. So what I found is I want people who can think in different options, can look at the complexities that we have there, not try to ultra simplify things down. And my job is to help them think it through. But when they leave the room, it's not mine, it's going to be theirs. In other words, I think the very best leaders are non-stick. They're Teflon,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah.
At the end, it's not going to hold with them. It's going to hold with someone else. And I have a saying that I use in my trainings is, if you don't have a who, the who is always you.
Hmm.
So, you've got to learn to let go and let others run with it. But you need people who can they're not perfectionists because you're not going to find a perfect answer anymore. You got to people who think in options and have the confidence to make a choice and keep moving forward and not let the fact that there's no perfect answer stop or slow them down.
Okay. Spencer's raised an interesting question for you, Mark, is
Yeah.
that we have a young team and they are unfamiliar with the structure of a corporate environment. How would you address raising their standards when it covers everything from how they dress to how they communicate? Some of it feels so basic to me, but clearly
Yeah.
something they don't even think about.
Yeah, it's a good one because often when I've been working at different groups and so forth, the key thing comes up is I hire the young people in, but they don't have the people skills. They can sort of send a lot of text messages and WhatsApps and chats and so forth, but they don't have the people skills along the way. I tell you, there's certain things you can provide in terms of training and say these are quote best practices. I don't like necessarily come down and telling people exactly what to do, but I'd like to share some best practices, share some stories and examples with them. But nothing works better than having them sort of ride alongside another experienced person, or do a little mini project together, or have someone as a quick role model. I think that works the best. I work with so many different top salespeople, and they say everything changed with them when they rode alongside one of the best salespeople, and they just picked up so much right away. I mean, we are all role models for somebody, and I think we don't utilize our role models in the best way. In other words, I used to draw a diagram where I knew who my role models were, and basically my focus was how do I link up work with that role model with other people who need help. And in many ways, I created mini projects sometimes. And look at this. If you have projects happening, small, medium, or large in a company, your culture begins to feel change is normal. So I think it's how we divide up the work is a great way for these people to understand kind of what's expected of them in a much more faster way. And you get a double win. You get something done, and they also learning.
Okay. Mark Francis has come back on your comment. He said one aspect that from you is if there's no who, it's you. Can you please explain this concept?
Well, I'll give you this. I built this from an email from my client. I had a client. He was running a financial services firm for Europe, Africa, Middle East, etc. He had a huge problem, and his first instinct was just call his best person in and tell them how to fix it. But he heard my coaching voice in his head. He called his best person in and said, "Can you come back tomorrow morning with two or three options to fix this problem?" Person came back. They had a discussion which option would work best, and it was fixed perfectly. So he sent me an email, and the subject line of the email was this: My how is who. I figured out my job as a leader now. My how is not how. I pay my people for how. My how is who. My how is hiring the right who, growing the right who. And then I gave him the quote Dr. Seuss saying, if you don't have a who, the who is always you. And so I think if we think who faster, we're going to delegate faster. If we think who faster, we're also going to get a lot more done quicker because often a 5 minute conversation with the right who might save you 5 hours. And I think it's a really good concept because if you're thinking who, you'll let go faster and you'll involve people more. And when you involve them from the very beginning, it's going to feel theirs. I just give you an example that I used to happen loads of time. I have an issue come up. Let's say it's 10 o'clock in the morning. I don't have much time. I call up my best person. I say, listen, here's the issue. Can you ever think about this? Let's get together at 2 o'clock and have a chat through what's possible. Between 10 and 2, I don't have to do anything. And I just show up, help them along with what options. So the thing is that we cannot travel too far with the how as a leader before delegating. Because if we think about it halfway and then we give it to our people, it doesn't feel theirs, it feels ours. So the power you have as a leader is not your answer. Your power you have as a leader is your question. And here's another reason why. We only get clear on anything we only get clear, we don't get clear until we either have to say it, verbalize it, or we have to write it down. Because when we think by ourselves, we think in fragments. We're never forced to complete the thought until we either have to write it or say it. So if as a leader, if you ask your people the right questions, you get them to see it in the way you'd like them to see it. It's almost, you could almost say it's like manipulation, but you're getting them to think it through in the way you would like them to see it. So I think a lot of that is the best leaders is they're very good at two things. They're asking better questions, and they're asking questions tailored to the personality and the type of person they're dealing with, because they don't want the conversation to go on forever. And they're very good storytellers, because here's the thing, stories and examples, they're kind of like an indirect tell. Psychologically, people don't feel that they're being directly told when they hear a story or an example, but they get an idea what to do. And also, stories and examples are immediately relevant. In other words, think back, whenever you hear a story or an example, your mind goes to experience similar in your own life. So it's relatable in a split second. And so that's why I think the very best leaders, they're great at asking questions, and they're really good at sharing the appropriate and the real key story or an example at the right time.
Okay, well, thank you for that. Again, further insight, if you may. Chester said, can you share some of your insight into how to lead people who have lots of experience and an ego that means that they are not open to change? You need them to take more accountability and ownership.
Yeah. Yeah, it's an interesting one. In a chart, they're very, very high in performance, but a disaster in behavior, right? In America, in the corporate world, they call those people the corporate terrorists because
Mm.
they're delivering, but they're destroying the culture at equal ways. I tell you, the only way I know how to deal with those people is to teach them humbleness. In other words, you have to give them a responsibility for which they're not the expert, and they need help from others in order to deliver it, right? Because they're more the Lone Ranger. They're delivering quite well, big ego, but they're trying to get everybody to work for them. And now you have to force them to work with others. And I did that, and I worked in a large corporation too. So my second thing with them is saying, listen, you're not having strong influence with others. You're getting the job done, but people are reluctant to work with you. And I basically take the future away from them. I said, listen, you're not promotable unless you're able to influence others, because leadership is influence. And so sometimes you take the future away from them and say, are you wanting to change? In one time I tried it. I knew it would work, but I just I put a 360 on this type of person, and I paid half their bonus based on how they changed their behavior. So that year they improved, but then the following year I took the 360 off them, and they just went right back to their normal behavior again. So I was more of a like an experiment or a test. But the problem with these type of people in a very large organization and for a long time is a leader will say, this person's delivering. Yes, they're a problem. They're causing some issues, but can I live with this person for another 15 months? Because I think I'll get promoted and I'll be out of this, and now that be someone else's headache. So those type of people get passed from leader to leader to leader, and they're not dealt with.
Okay. How do you inspire people to think big about the possibilities, be they sales, development, or other, to ensure we creating aspirational targets and bigger impacts? And that's from
Uh,
Ben.
yeah, that's a good one, because you really need to get them involved in the vision, but you have to paint a picture of possibilities. There's a great definition created by Andy Stanley of a vision, Andy Stanley was a son of a very famous TV preacher in America and said, I don't want to live under my father's shadow. So he decided a vision for a 10,000 member church and went out and built it. And he has very, very good leadership podcasts and everything like that. And he said, a vision is a mental picture of what could be, fueled by the conviction of what should be. Right. And so if you really want people to think big, you have to get your people thinking in possibilities, but then also the why behind it. Why should it be us? Why are we uniquely positioned to create those possibilities versus our competitors or versus others? So you need both the possibilities and the why. But I think the leader has to start it out by setting a direction that stretches people. But one other thing about stretching them is when you set out a vision or a direction, you have to be able to explain that vision in sort of like mile markers, right? So let's say your vision is 5 years down the road or 5 miles down the road. You have to be able to explain the vision in different mile markers because your younger people can't see that far. Your younger people can only see the first 400 meters or so. So I found that a leader has to be able to tell stories and examples explaining the steps towards getting there, which helps trigger people's creativity that way, okay, about the possibilities. But the other thing too about this is that if you want people's really good creativity, creativity needs two things. It needs a very, very clear target and it needs some type of constraint. Because if you have no constraints, there's no need to be creative. If unlimited money, unlimited resources and everything, you don't need creativity. All right. So the real key thing I found in leadership and mid-career onward, I realized this because my boss was doing it to me. He was giving me some type of constraints all the time because he wanted me to think differently about how we were going to achieve something. So you stretch people with possibilities, but you don't make it unlimited in terms of their resources about how to get there. You give them some constraints so it forces them to be creative.
Okay, thank you for that. A question from my colleague Drew. What's the one quality of a leader you couldn't live without? Accessibility, empathy, passion, curiosity.
I tell you, the two of those were kind of linked, but the very best leaders are always curious. But the other thing is, the very best leaders are good listeners. And not that they listen forever, because interesting thing. I often ask people. I say, very, very good leaders by nature, are they patient or impatient people by nature? And a lot of the room, half the room sometimes says patient. They're never patient. You don't go to a leader and say, I'm sorry, I'm going to be a day or two late. And a leader says, oh, don't worry, take a week. Yeah, you don't hear that stuff. What I found with very, very good leaders is they have something called strategic patience. In other words, they know when they need to listen an extra 5 or 10 minutes for their people to leave with more confidence or more clarity to move forward. And I found that the very best leaders, they're not listening forever, right? And if you could have too much empathy and just keep listening and listening and listening. You can't do that. But you have to be able to listen and have enough emotional intelligence and awareness to know when you need to listen at the right times so that your people leave the meeting with more confidence to take action. And that's what I found out. And it was very interesting. I had a student who was the CIO of Home Depot, and he led their transformation during the pandemic to all digital and completely changed the way they were doing things. And I called him up and I wanted to ask him some advice because I was working on a transformation with a European company. And he stopped me right at the beginning. He says, you taught me something 13 years ago that made a huge difference. You taught me the value of strategic patience. So he remembers that even after 13 years. And I think we got to listen. We can't listen forever. and but we have to be patient. Now, there's one other thing we can do to help that. And here's what I found. The number one thing I needed to teach in my people all the time was the ability to be concise. Because if people are not concise, your meetings are going on too long. If people are not concise, they cannot influence other people because you have more influence by them talking than you talking. I'll give you an example. I was leading in Europe, and I always called the general manager of subsidiary, "Who are your superstars?" before I visited because I want to learn from. I took the top superstar salesperson out to lunch in Germany, and what she said never left me. She said, "I owe all my success in sales to one phrase. If the customer or prospect is talking, I'm winning." They're selling themselves. And
Yeah.
so I really believe it's the ability to listen, but it's the ability to ask the right questions. And when you need to expand someone's mindset or you need to give them a direction, use a good story or an example.
Mm. Yeah, thank you for that. And again, my colleague Nick, he's raised a really good point that I'm sure quite a few of us have been through. He said that when I took on my first leadership role at the age of 28, one of my sales team had joined the company 5 years before I was born. Wow, that is definitely a challenge. And I think we've all been there. Okay, let's have a look here. Right. Here's another question for you. What is the best approach to balancing the needs of your team with the needs of the organization while fostering and cultivating a positive culture of accountability and ownership from your team?
Wow, yeah, you're always going to have to be balancing things across and everything. And there's a lot of people say that you have to treat everybody in similar ways, but I don't agree with that. I mean, if you look at all the sports teams and the most successful sports teams, they have lots of good teamwork and everything, but they're playing their best people the majority of the time. The guy in America, John Wooden, who won something like 11 national basketball championships, and he played most of his best people. I think if you really want to drive good performance, uh, you've got to give people time, your time, and they have to feel that they're appreciated and they're developing and they're growing themselves. And a leader can't give everybody the same equal time. I think you need to focus on your role models first and get your role models to help the others. And so that everybody feels they're getting personal attention and they're growing. And then a leader's job is to come around and walk around, sort of put your nose in at different spots and try and reinforce key things. But the other thing is people people can't grow fast enough just learning from their boss. I think in today's world, especially because we're so connected, we're not lifetime in a company like people aren't before. I think all your key people should have mentors. It can come from somewhere else in the company if you have a large company, or can come from the outside. But I think we all need that type of extra guidance. And I think that's the fastest way I knew how to develop a team and work within it and drive accountability is to make sure that everybody feels that they're growing. So they're going to use more of their potential, step out of their comfort zone. And the other thing is you've got to make performance visible. You've got to make everybody's performance visible in ways. Now, sometimes you go down to the individual, sometimes you just go down to different departments, but whatever is visible, people feel much more accountable for because they'll look bad if they don't do a good job. But let's say they do a fantastic job, and what was made visible, now they're flying because they feel tremendous pride because so many knew they did a great job. So when I was leading, I was thinking three things when I took over a new job. What is success for my team? What do we need to achieve? Who are the key people and the role models who are going to help me achieve it and also drive the culture? The third thing I was thinking always was, what can I make visible to hold people more accountable and to give them that pride by having more and more people knew they did a great job.
One of the comments that you make that most people that have met you always seem to remember is nose in, fingers out.
Yeah.
Can you explain that for our audience today?
Yeah, I mean, if you are holding people accountable for the achievement, you can't just sort of delegate and go off and play golf for 2 months. You got to be nose in and fingers out. Uh, Particularly on your best people, you got to put your nose in, because when do you have a time for a coaching opportunity if you're never around? If you don't trust them, your nose is going to be in more. Let's say you have someone really junior in your team. You probably maybe extreme nose in because they need help for the first couple of months before they can do it by themselves. But fingers are out. Your fingers aren't in. If your fingers are in and you tell them what to do, they want the easy way out the next time, and just they'll come to you and tell me what to do. So I think it's a great philosophy, nose in, fingers out. And I think it's a great reflection question at the end of each week. Was
Mm.
my nose in at the right times, or was I surprised by something I should have known? Or my fingers in too much? Maybe I need to change my leadership style. Or if my fingers are in too much with this individual and I end up doing more of their job, then this person's not in the right place. Okay. And so I think it's the two go together. Having a very clear outcome focus that makes people own the outcomes, but then putting your nose in and keeping your fingers out. And I'll give you a tip. When I delegated what I delegate to my people, that outcome, I determined right then when my nose should be in. Okay. And so I kind of gives me ideas. And the easy to make a nose in, if you give a key initiative to person, you ask them for the milestones or the steps. And then your nose goes in at those milestones and those steps. Um, the other thing is, I'll tell you an interesting story. I met with a program manager of a very large corporation, and he had 25 project leaders below him. He said, listen, we are going to have a meeting at each milestone for your project. Okay. But I'm going to give you 5 tokens. You can come see me 5 times during your project, and you choose when you use the 5 tokens, right? Because you don't want people coming for small, stupid stuff. You want them coming for meaningful stuff. So there's an element of leaders have to be available, but not too available. Right? I'll give you another example. A leader of a peer group years and years ago had his own company as well. He decided to take Friday off, and so he would not be available on a Friday. What did his people learn? His people learned, well, if I can make a decision by myself on Friday, probably I can make the same type of decisions on a Monday through Thursday too. So
Brilliant.
not being available was a key driver of holding people much more accountable for their own decision making.
Right. Yeah, we're coming up to uh, the end of our session today, Mark. But one
Yep.
question I have for you is what insights could you share for leaders to succeed in 2026, given the current economic outlook?
I think we're in a level so much of uncertainty and so many issues. I think there's 2 key things that I would say. You've got to have reflection and think ahead time built into your week so that you're in the driver's seat of your team, right? And you kind of anticipating what could come next and what could be the options and what you do. Jeff Bezos, when he was when Amazon was booming, I think someone said that he used to go away every 6 months for a day and a half by himself and just reflect and think ahead. And out of that came a number of businesses. So first, as a leader, you need to stay in the driver's seat. The second thing is you got to find ways to keep your best people involved in where you're going and use their ideas. Because if they're included in where you're going and the choices we're making in terms of how we're handling the uncertainty and the situations, they're going to be able to take a lot more action on something they've been involved with. And it comes back from what I think is one of the most strategic things that a leader can do is ask their best people and ask others for advice. Think about this. When we ask people for advice, we now basically are personally bringing them into the effort we want to do. And there was a saying by a guy, Peter Diamandis. He was going around the world asking money to fund his X Prizes many years ago. He's a futurist. And he realized this: if I ask for money from rich people to fund the prizes, I get advice. If I ask for advice, I get money. And what I found is asking for input or advice strategically with the right people personally brings them into the effort. So I'd say is a leader has to be forward looking and reserve time for that. Don't be buried. When you're buried in your operation answering your people's questions, you're in the passenger seat of your leadership. You've got to have that quiet time to think ahead and think of the options. And as you're thinking through some of them in terms of how you're going to action it, include your best people.
Okay. Well, Mark, thank you for that insight. We are actually coming very close to the end of our webinar today. So may I thank you all for attending, and equally, can you join me in thanking Mark for such an insightful and inspiring session today? And
Yeah,
thank
thanks
you
for
very
the
much.
opportunity. I was enjoyed it and some really good questions there too.
Brilliant. So, if you'd like further information or support, please see our website, www.the Group, or if you wish, you can contact me directly. That's Peter Lynagh, spelled Lynagh, at the uspirepartnership.com. So once again, thank you all. And again, thank you very much, Mark. It's been an absolute pleasure again to work with you.
Thanks.